July 1945. The war in Europe was over, but the Pacific was a furnace. A heavy cruiser, the USS Indianapolis, was about to write the final brutal chapter of its story. You know that feeling when you're holding a secret so big it almost burns a hole in your pocket? That gut-wrenching tension of knowing something that could change everything, but you can't say a word. That's what this ship was. A steel hull carrying the seed of the atomic age. But for the men on board, it was just another mission. Unremarkable, routine, until it wasn't. Listen, don't let this just be a story about a ship. This was 1,196 men, sons, brothers, fathers, friends, young men who joked in the mess hall, wrote letters home, and dreamed of the day they'd see American soil again. That's the story I want to tell you. Not just the mission logs and the naval reports, but the story of the men who were thrown into the darkest corner of the ocean and forgotten. So here's the short version first. Plain and blunt. In late July 1945, the USS Indianapolis was torpedoed by a Japanese submarine and sank in 12 minutes. Of the nearly 1,200 men on board, about 900 went into the water. When they were finally found by accident 4 days later, only 316 were left alive. It was the single greatest loss of life at sea in the history of the U.S. Navy. The world was about to change, but for these men, their world had already ended. But that's just the headline. Let me pull back the curtain a bit. Picture it. The ship, a decorated veteran of the Pacific Theater, cutting through the waves with a new, urgent purpose. The crew, young and restless, had no idea what they were guarding. The war was supposed to be winding down. Home felt closer than ever before. The USS Indianapolis was a proud ship, a Portland-class heavy cruiser that had seen action from the Aleutian Islands to Okinawa. It was the flagship of the U.S. Fifth Fleet, a vessel that had carried President Franklin D. Roosevelt and earned 10 battle stars for its service. But in July 1945, its mission became something else entirely. It was chosen for a task of unparalleled secrecy and importance, a mission so classified that it bypassed normal naval protocols. The ship was ordered to sail from San Francisco to the island of Tinian at top speed, carrying a mysterious heavy crate. Inside that crate, and in another canister secured on the deck, were the components for Little Boy, the atomic bomb destined for Hiroshima. This was the cargo that would force Japan's surrender and end the Second World War. The mission was so top secret that most of the 1,096 crewmen on board had no idea what they were transporting. They were just sailors doing their duty, following orders. Captain Charles McVay III, a respected officer, was told only that his cargo was vital to the war effort and must be guarded at all costs. They made the journey in record time, delivering their world-altering package on July 26th. The first part of their duty was done. The most dangerous part, they thought, was over. With its secret payload delivered, the Indianapolis received new orders: sail to Guam, then head to Leyte in the Philippines for training exercises. The ship departed Guam unescorted. The waters were considered relatively safe. The threat from Japanese submarines supposedly diminished. The crew could finally relax. The tension of the secret mission was gone. Now it was just a routine trip, a straight shot across the Philippine Sea. The men talked of home, played cards, and slept under the stars on the hot steel deck to escape the stifling heat below. The war felt distant. They were out of the fire, but the war wasn't done with them. Shortly after midnight on July 30th, 1945, hell erupted from the depths. 2 torpedoes from the Japanese submarine I-58 slammed into the Indianapolis's starboard side. The first hit the bow, blowing off nearly 40 feet of the ship. The second struck midship, igniting a massive fuel tank and setting off a chain reaction of explosions. The ship's power was cut instantly, plunging everything into darkness and chaos. There was no time to organize, no time to launch lifeboats, no time to even fully comprehend what was happening. The great ship, a veteran of so many battles, went down with shocking speed. Of the 1,196 men on board, roughly 300 were killed in the initial attack or went down with the ship. The remaining 900 were thrown into the vast, dark, unforgiving Pacific Ocean, many of them covered in thick, black fuel oil. They were alone. Because the mission had been so secret, the Indianapolis was not being tracked. Its route was known only to a select few, and a series of communication blunders and bureaucratic failures meant no one was expecting it to arrive in Leyte on time. No distress signal was ever received. The ship's electrical systems had been destroyed instantly. The U.S. Navy, the most powerful maritime force in the world, did not even know its flagship cruiser was missing. For the 900 men bobbing in the water, help was not coming. No one was looking for them. The first day was about shock and survival. Men clung to debris, life rafts, and each other, trying to organize and find their shipmates in the dark. But as the sun rose, a new horror began. The oil-slicked water couldn't hide the blood from the injured, and the blood drew sharks. First one, then dozens. For 4 days and 5 nights, the survivors endured a living nightmare. The relentless sun burned their skin and cracked their lips. The salt water, which many drank out of maddening thirst, only hastened dehydration and insanity. They battled exposure, starvation, and the constant terrifying presence of sharks picking them off one by one. Men went mad from drinking salt water, hallucinating that the sunken ship was just below the surface, offering fresh water and food. They would swim down and never come back up. The groups of survivors dwindled hour by hour. Then, on the 4th day, a miracle. A PV-1 Ventura patrol bomber, flying a routine anti-submarine patrol, happened to be in the area. The pilot, Lieutenant Wilbur Gwynn, was adjusting his antenna when he glanced down and saw the oil slick. Thinking it was from a leaking Japanese sub, he descended for a closer look. What he saw was not a submarine, but the heads of men, scattered across the ocean. He immediately dropped survival gear and radioed for help. What followed was a massive, desperate rescue operation. Another pilot, Lieutenant Adrian Marks, defied orders and landed his seaplane in the shark-infested waters, pulling 56 survivors from the sea, strapping them to the wings when the fuselage was full. He saw the state the men were in and knew they wouldn't last until ships arrived. For the 316 men who were ultimately pulled from the water, it was the end of an ordeal that defies imagination. The story, however, did not end with the rescue. In a move that remains controversial to this day, the Navy needed a scapegoat for the disaster. Captain Charles McVeigh III was court-martialed for hazarding his ship by failing to zigzag. He was the only captain in U.S. history to be court-martialed for losing his ship in an act of war. The commander of the Japanese submarine that sank the Indianapolis even testified that zigzagging would have made no difference. Many of the survivors stood by their captain, but the Navy convicted him. Though his sentence was later remitted, the shame haunted McVeigh for the rest of his life. He took his own life in 1968. For decades, the survivors and their families fought to clear their captain's name. Fueled by new evidence and the tireless work of a young student named Hunter Scott, the campaign finally succeeded. In 2000, the U.S. Congress passed a resolution exonerating Captain McVeigh, and President Clinton signed it. And then, in August 2017, a research team led by Paul Allen finally located the wreck of the USS Indianapolis, resting nearly 18,000 feet deep on the floor of the Philippine Sea. The ship had been found, a final silent monument to the men who served and died. It was a tomb, but it was no longer lost.